global heritage will unite. We share brilliant values and honor the world's most cherished legacies to pass our heritage on to future generations. Busan invites you. The 48th session of UNESCO World Heritage Committee. July 2026, Busan, Korea.
In our headlines on this Friday, January 23rd, here in South Korea. 73 South Koreans who had been detained in Cambodia for alleged involvement in online scams returned home earlier this morning to face interrogation. And a closed-door meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in Davos was followed by a similar interaction between Russian leader Vladimir Putin and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow. Meanwhile, a charming county in southern Korea is gaining traction for an intriguing campaign that allows travel experiences at half the expenses. Dozens of South Koreans suspected of scam operations from Cambodia landed here at Incheon International Airport earlier this morning to face criminal investigation. Our Chung Hye-rim reports.
73 South Koreans accused of operating scams and violent crime rings in Cambodia have been extradited to South Korea for investigation. The suspects arrived Friday morning at Incheon International Airport aboard a chartered Korean air flight from Phnom Penh. Detention warrants had already been issued for them when they boarded the plane, as the inside of a Korean registered plane is considered national territory under Korean law. Upon landing, all 73 suspects were taken into custody and transferred to detention facilities, wearing handcuffs and escorted by 2 police guards per person. The suspects, mostly men in their 20s and 30s, kept their heads down, wore masks, and refused to answer any reporters' questions. The suspects allegedly defrauded 869 South Korean victims of around $33.3 million through romance scams, fake investment schemes, and other fraudulent activities, according to the Blue House. 70 of the suspects are linked to scam crimes, while 3 face additional charges, including hostage-taking, robbery, and illegal gambling. Notably, a married couple accused of running a large-scale romance scam using deepfake technology were among the extradited after going through extreme measures, including plastic surgery to avoid capture. Police say the suspects were detained at 7 scam compounds across Cambodia, including sites in Sihanoukville, Poi near the Thai border, and Mondulkiri province near Vietnam. Victims, Korean men in their 20s who were held hostage and tortured, were also reportedly rescued during the raid. The operation was led by the Cambodian Police Force and Intelligence Service, assisted by a joint Korean task force involving the National Police Agency, Justice and Foreign Affairs Ministries, and the National Intelligence Service. This is South Korea's largest ever requested extradition of criminal suspects from a single nation. Officials say police will question the suspects before prosecutors seek formal arrest warrants. Chung Hye-rim, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, e-commerce giant Coupang's American investors are seeking legal action against the South Korean government on grounds of discrimination. Our Lee Seung-jae explains.
2 major U.S. investors in e-commerce giant Coupang have formally notified the South Korean government of their intent to pursue international arbitration, accusing authorities of discriminatory treatment toward the U.S.-listed firm. Green Oaks Capital Partners and Altimeter Capital Management said Thursday they plan to file arbitration claims under the South Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. The move follows a series of South Korean government investigations into Coupang after a massive customer data breach was revealed last November. In a notice sent to President Lee Jae-myung and the Justice Ministry, the investors said their combined equity stake in Coupang exceeds $1.5 billion. They argued that regulatory pressure intensified as Coupang gained market share from domestic Korean and Chinese competitors. In a separate filing to the Office of the United States Trade Representative, the investors also urged Washington to launch a probe under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 and consider trade remedies. They claimed that enforcement actions against Coupang far exceeded those faced by rival firms. The investors cited hundreds of audits, inspections, and penalties imposed by multiple South Korean agencies, including the Fair Trade Commission, tax authorities, labor regulators, and financial watchdogs. They described the data breach as limited and accused officials of exaggerating the incident to inflame public opinion and harm the company. They also said the regulatory campaign erased billions of dollars in market value, losses they say were borne by U.S. shareholders, including retirement funds. In response, the Blue House said the investigation should not be viewed as a trade dispute with the U.S., stressing that the probe reflects the unprecedented scale of the data leak and is being conducted in accordance with South Korean law. Coupang was founded by Korean-American entrepreneur Kim Bum-seok and generates about 90% of its revenue in South Korea. 이승재, Arirang News.
On the diplomatic front, efforts to establish peace continue. A closed-door meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in Davos was followed by a similar interaction between Russian leader Vladimir Putin and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow. Our Kim Bo-kyung has the latest.
Top U.S. negotiators, including Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner and Russian President Vladimir Putin, have held talks in Moscow. Lasting more than 3 hours, the talks ran from Thursday night into the early hours of Friday. President Putin had previously indicated that he would discuss with Witkoff a plan to allocate $1 billion from Russia's frozen assets in the United States into the Board of Peace, a new international body proposed by Trump. Before that, U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had a meeting on Thursday in Davos, Switzerland, which both of them described positively. On the sidelines of the World Economic Forum, the two leaders had an hour-long session on post-war security guarantees for Ukraine and plans for economic reconstruction.
I had a very good meeting with President Zelensky. Everybody wants to have the war end.
Zelensky, too, gave a positive assessment of the talks and added that Ukrainian and Russian teams will have their first trilateral meeting with U.S. officials in the United Arab Emirates on Friday and Saturday.
And I think that it will be the first trilateral meeting in Emirates. It will be tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Yes, it will be 2 days meetings in Emirates.
Witkoff also said earlier that he believed the two sides were down to one issue without elaborating. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The Trump administration is maintaining its expansion of military presence in the Middle East ahead of a potential strike against Iran. Now, speaking to members of the media back on Thursday, U.S. President Donald Trump claimed he had, quote, a big force going toward Iran, adding that he'd rather not see anything happen. Earlier, Trump had spoken of action against Iran over its vicious crackdown on anti-government protesters that resulted in thousands of fatalities. The USS Abraham Lincoln and its carrier strike group are now reportedly in the Indian Ocean. Back on the local front, the South Korean Navy's special forces assigned with deep-sea missions conducted their grueling winter training this week to strengthen their readiness posture. Our Cho Young-lin was there.
Despite freezing temperatures, 70 deep-sea divers from the Sea Salvage and Rescue Unit pushed through grueling drills and high-intensity physical training. Operating under the motto to the vaster and deeper sea, the SSU carries out critical missions at maritime disaster sites, including search and the rescue of distressed surface ships and submarines.
Through training that mirrors real-life operations, we ensure the highest level of rescue readiness to protect the lives of our people.
The training runs for 4 days in late January, traditionally the coldest part of winter in Korea, with temperatures dropping to as low as -8 degrees Celsius. Here, the SSU runs intensive winter training to build physical endurance and mental resilience needed to withstand the winter seas.
The SSU is ready to dive into the sea even in the freezing cold, if it means protecting our fellow service members and the public. We're fully prepared to carry out any mission.
Divers conduct scuba proficiency drills in waters near Guimet Naval Port, practicing search and rescue operations for simulated drowning victims. The highlight of the training is the Iron Platoon Selection Competition designed to test the diver's stamina, teamwork, and operational capability under extreme conditions. At the unit's basic diving training facility, divers train using a surface-applied diving system. They practice tasks such as assembling pipes and tying knots in low-visibility underwater conditions. Teamwork is further assessed through time-based competitions in group running, rubber boat paddling, and open water fin swimming. 조영은, Arirang News, 진해.
The Culture Ministry will allocate 499 billion won to its Content Policy Fund to raise a total to 731.8 billion won. The fund was jointly set up with the Korea Venture Investment Corporation and is now 22% larger on year and stands as the largest content policy fund ever established. The ministry links this reality to the Lee Jae-myung administration's resolve to support the growth of K-culture into a 300 trillion won market. On the entertainment front, Netflix summer sensation K-pop Demon Hunters has been nominated for 2 Oscars, one for Best Animated Feature and the other for Best Original Song for Golden. The 98th Academy Awards will be held on March 15th in Los Angeles. Earlier this month, the animated film also won Best Animated Film and Best Original Song at the Golden Globes and the Critics' Choice Awards. The Seoul city government has conditionally approved a request by BTS for a concert in Gwanghwamun Square this March. Its agency HYBE had made the request as BTS prepares for its global comeback show, and its first stage here in Seoul will now take place at the downtown square on March 21st. The approval was announced during a meeting on Thursday with a list of stringent safety conditions to be met. BTS's 5th full-length album titled Arirang will be released on March 20th. A charming county in the southern part of the country is gaining traction for an intriguing tourism policy that allows travel experiences at half the expenses. Our culture correspondent Park Gun-woo was there to show us how.
Imagine being able to travel for half the cost. This is what's happening in Gangjin-gun, one of the southernmost counties on the Korean peninsula, surrounded by a beautiful ocean and bays spread with vast reed fields. Known for its clean environment and rich biodiversity, Gangjin has been offering pre-registered travelers half of their spending in local gift certificates since 2024, usable on their next visit. This policy aims to revitalize the region as its population declines, now standing at just over 30,000. And since this year's program began on January 19th, visitors have already been pouring in, despite Korea's recent cold snap.
I hadn't visited before because it felt far away. But this policy makes it very appealing, as you can enjoy traditional culture and explore around. If it expands nationwide, I think more young couples will choose domestic travel.
The numbers back that up. In the first year, more than 15,000 groups joined the program, spending around $4.5 million. Just a year later, participation jumped to nearly 40,000, with spending more than doubling. And as hands-on cultural travel continues to grow, Gangjin is fast becoming more than just a sightseeing stop. Thanks to its rich natural environment, Gangjin is the perfect place to enjoy authentic rural culture. And at this time of year, one of the highlights is definitely tangerine picking. And you can just walk through vinyl houses and pick fresh tangerines right off the trees and enjoy a fun hands-on experience. When life gives you tangerines, Every piece of fruit delivers a message to those tired of city life, offering a taste of farmers' hard work and a slower, more natural rhythm of life.
The half-price travel policy has had a huge impact on our local economy. Guest numbers at our farm are up about 30%. As the local population is limited, visitors from outside are bringing new energy into this rural community.
And the experiences don't stop at tangerines. Depending on visitor taste, Gangjin offers a wide array of activities, including traditional tea making and tasting, as the places where Korea's first commercial tea was produced. Visitors can gently place tea leaves into molds to experience the making process firsthand and learn proper drinking etiquette along the way. Classic tea snacks like sweet bean jelly add even more depth and flavor to the experience. With so much to see, taste, and experience all at half the price, Gangjin is turning simple moments from tangerines to tea into experiences worth remembering. 박건우, 아리랑 뉴스, 강진.
In this installment of our special stories to celebrate 140 years of Korea-France friendship, we share with you the thoughts of France's top curator of Asian art. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young sat down with her for this interview, which is also available in its full format on air tonight at 10 p.m. Korea Standard Time.
Thank you, Dr. Lintz, so much for making time for us today.
It's a pleasure for me to welcome you here in Guimet Museum.
Musée Guimet is very well known for being the biggest museum in Europe, holding Korean art, Asian art. And well, first, could you introduce your Korean collection and why it matters as a reference point for Korean art in Europe?
Yes, you're right. We are so lucky to have one of the most important in the world, I should say. And what is also symbolic for us is our museum opened in 1889, and 4 years later, in 1893, we opened Korean galleries. So it's really linked in the history of the museum, and it was at this time in the heart of the collection. So that's why it's of course still now, after many acquisitions, donation, one of the most important in the world, and I should say the most important in Europe. And what is also for us important, 1893 is an important date. It's just 4 years after the opening of the museum, and it's 7 years after the opening of the diplomatic relation between Korea and France. So I think it symbolizes very well the importance of Korea in this museum.
So from a curatorial perspective, what do you think are still maybe under-recognized by the European audience when it comes to Korean art?
My opinion is that here in Europe, we don't know very well Korean art, and it's our responsibility, our mission to promote it better. That's why this year, 2026, we will have a special Korean season in Musée Guimet. Because here, because of the relation with Japan, for instance, and what we call sometimes Orientalism during 19th century, people here know better Japanese art, for instance. They know a little about Chinese porcelain or Chinese calligraphy, but it's for them very difficult to understand the place of Korean arts in this area of Eastern Asia. So I will be happy if in 1 year, with all the visitors we are expecting here for this Korean season, that I can hear, now I understand what, and I see what is Korean art.
You play a very important, very crucial role in promoting Korean art, of course, here in France. And would you say that the recognition has been growing by the year?
Yes, I think, of course, everyone knows about the importance of the Hallyu movement, the K-pop, K-beauty, and we will have here as the first exhibition of the Korean year in March, next March, a K-beauty exhibition. So I think to be able to be attractive for people to discover Korean art, I think it's interesting to enter in it by the present phenomenon of K-pop, K-beauty. And I think it's a good way to understand the past through the present.
Finally, as we look forward into the year of 2026, the 140th year of Korea-France relations, what kind of meaningful developments do you hope to see as cultural institutions in particular expand cooperation?
Of course, such a special celebration of the 140 years diplomatic relation between Korea and France has to be an opportunity to develop more relation and to build a fundamental project for the future. Of course, exhibitions, books, conference, but also for me what is important is to know better all Korean artists, musicians, performers, of course the Korean cinema. So at the end of 26, what I can tell you, it will not be the end of Korean events here in Guimet Museum.
I see there's more to come, and we hope to see you later in the year in Seoul. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Lintz.
Thank you.
The cold snap that kicked off earlier this week is still going strong as we head toward the weekend. Temperatures will continue to stay below -10 degrees Celsius through Sunday, so it's going to feel bitterly cold outside. In addition, cold wave warnings and advisories are still in place in many areas. Snow will continue along the west coast of the Jeollado provinces through this weekend. By tomorrow morning, coastal areas of the Jeollado provinces and Ulleungdo could have 2 to 7 centimeters of snow, with 1 to 5 centimeters are expected in Gwangju and the mountainous areas of Jeju Island. Seoul will start off at -11 degrees tomorrow morning, with Chuncheon at -14 degrees. Highs will rise to only -2 degrees in Seoul, 3 degrees in Gwangju and Daegu. From next Monday, temperatures will slowly rise and the fierce cold will ease off a bit. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. Right, those are the headlines at the Seoul here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we delve into politics and soft power. So do stay with us, and thank you for now.
The new shopping game is starting.
어렸을 때 아버지가 클래식을 좋아하셔서 자연스럽게 공연장을 이제 가족들이 다 같이 가게 되었는데 그때 포피아노 연주를 제가 실제로 가서 봤었는데 그때 이제 너무 멋있다 생각이 들어서 부모님께 피아노를 하고 싶다고 졸랐습니다. 저조차도 누군가의 연주를 보고 이렇게 피아니스트를 꿈꿔왔듯이 누군가도 제 연주를 듣고 다양한 감정을 이렇게 느꼈으면 좋겠어요. 어쨌든 저는 21세기 사람이니까 21세기 트렌드를 또 잃으면 안 될 것 같아서 간혹은 또 가요나 팝송도 많이 들으려고 노력하고 있고요. 그러다가도 또 이제 다시 클래식으로 돌아오게 되더라고요. 그냥 클래식 음악은 진짜 어떤 시대에 들어도 누구나 공감할 수 있다고 생각을 해서 그래서 클래식 음악이 제일 마음에 와닿는 것 같아요. 지나바카오 콩쿠르에서 특히 2라운드 연주가 저는 항상 기억에 남는 게 너무 무서웠어요, 사실. 한 음만 치는데 다음 음이 뭐였는지 기억이 안 날까 봐 너무 두렵더라고요. 악몽을 너무 많이 꿨었고 연습을 하는데도 불구하고 끝까지 안 되는 음악적인 패시지라든지 테크닉적인 패시지들이 있는데 그게 무대 위에서 정말 무의식적인 세계에서 갑자기 해결이 되는 경우가 있더라고요. 그랬을 때 이제 희열을 확 느끼는 것 같아요. 제가 지금 공부하고 있는 곡들, 즐겨 연주하고 있는 곡들이 사실 클래식 음악을 처음 접하는 분들에겐 익숙하지 않은 곡들이지만 지금 제 나이에 가장 잘 표현할 수 있는 음악이라고 생각을 해서 그런 레퍼토리를 준비를 하고 있는 거니까 같이 즐겨주시고 같이 공유해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the first court ruling on charges of insurrection against former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, as well as a new survey that shows the UAE topping the list of nations with the most positive image of South Korea. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, January 23rd, here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. We start our talk today with the latest on the political front with regard to the trials involving members of the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration for the short-lived martial law declaration before delving into South Korea's image on the international stage. For more on this, I have Kelly Kusulis-Jo with the Washington Post here in the studio. Kelly, it's been a while since we've had the pleasure of your company here. Welcome back.
Yes, happy to be back in the studio. Thanks.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, It's lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Kelly, let's start off then with news of former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo being sentenced to 23 years in prison for insurrection. Do tell us why this court ruling is so relevant.
Well, I think the sentence of 23 years, it's certainly a lot more than what prosecutors asked for. They had asked for 15. So that kind of heavy-handed sentence from a judge, I think a lot of people are looking at that. I mean, it's significant in and of itself for people who don't know. I mean, Han Duck-soo is a really prominent figure in Korean politics. So his kind of downfall with this conviction and sentencing is already, you know, a history-making event. But people are really looking at this as kind of a way to forecast what will happen to the impeached president, former President Yoon. Already we know he's gotten a 5-year sentence for a smaller charge. And if you look at what the Judge Yi said after the sentencing, he said that, you know, Han Duck-soo, quote, could have pushed South Korea back into a dictatorship, end quote. And he also said that he played a key role in a, quote, insurrection. So a lot of legal analysts in Korea are looking at that to kind of say, you know, it's basically been decided at this point that this imposition of martial law was an insurrection attempt. And when prosecutors are looking for something like a death penalty or a life sentence for former President Yoon, all of this would suggest, at least according to the legal analysts in the papers, that a very tough sentence is to come with any, you know, potential conviction. And really that maybe more broadly what South Korea is trying to do here is send the message that they're not playing around when it comes to their democracy. This is not the 1980s anymore. When the martial law declaration first happened, there was a lot of talk here on this show and elsewhere about what does this mean for Korea's reputation? Does the society look like it's still kind of in this bygone era, or should we celebrate the fact that the National Assembly was able to swat down the martial law so quickly? And I think, you know, months and months and months later, the story that's emerging is that South Korea will not tolerate those kinds of challenges to its democracy.
Right. Colin, as Kelly just said, prosecutors have called for the death penalty for former President Yoon Suk-yeol on charges of insurrection. Now, his court ruling is scheduled for February 19th, that is after the Lunar New Year holiday period. What do you believe will be the social implications of this particular ruling?
Yes, we're all waiting to hear what happens. Certainly, Yoon Suk-yeol's enemies are, as are his supporters, and they both have strong opinions, no doubt, about what comes down the pike. But it does make me think of something we've touched on this broadcast before, which is that when one president comes into power in South Korea, job number one is sort of undoing the legacy of the previous president. Now, Yoon Suk-yeol doesn't leave much of a legacy, and certainly not in the good sense. So I think Lee Jae-myung, his administration, and the Korea he oversees has plenty of good reason to undo what Yoon Suk-yeol has done. But at the same time, you do see, if you just think back president, before president, okay, this is a pattern that keeps happening. This is an extreme version of just, you know, let's try to wipe the slate clean. Let's, you know, where it's always year zero with each new administration. And as well, you know, the other pattern that comes to mind is how presidents in South Korea tend to come to bad ends one way or the other. You have fairly stiff sentences handed down. You have the president of death sentences as well, or at least one. Those don't get carried out, generally speaking. You know, these presidents get sentenced stiffly, but this is then commuted, or they're then pardoned. And even if, on the off chance that Yoon Suk-yeol does receive an actual death sentence, it's very unlikely that that will be carried out in the fullness of time. And as well, I think for a country as sensitive to its own image in the world as South Korea, however much the desire exists to execute a former president, actually doing so is, as the kids say, not a good look. So I do suspect whatever punishment he receives, it won't be actual death, but you will have, I think, a large amount of satisfaction drawn by the many who do not support him, whatever verdict he gets, whatever sentence he gets.
Right. Staying with this then, Kelly, you touched upon this earlier, of course, but what more has been said about the potential impact of this week's ruling for former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo on the upcoming ruling for former President Yoon Suk-yeol?
Yeah, I think right now a lot of the media gets a little bit stuck in kind of the granular things like how many years someone could get. But I think, you know, to Colin's point, as we mentioned, I mean, South Korea hasn't carried out a death sentence since the 1990s. It's not not very likely. But I think what we're seeing now more broadly is we're starting to see how this situation is potentially going to be talked about in the history books, more or less what the final narrative about this is going to be. I mean, South Korea, unfortunately, is very politically polarized right now. Fake news is rife here, just as it is in the United States. People are dealing with alternative realities, so to speak. But with the ruling on Han Duck-soo, I think the severity of it and the number of years that were added onto the sentence that the prosecutors were even asking for really is quite an act of, rejection for the martial law declaration. And, just one quote stood out to me. This is an English translation. But the judge had said, Korea could have returned to a dark past when the basic rights of people and the liberal democratic order were trampled upon and become trapped in a quagmire of dictatorships for an extended period. I think that's quite significant because those words coming out of the sentencing really kind of show how the judge is thinking about this event. A lot of people talked about this in the foreign media as kind of a 6-hour coup, almost as if to play it down. But I think what we're really seeing coming out of Han Duck-soo's sentencing is the gravity of the situation and how seriously the courts are taking it.
Right, and for more on that, of course, we'll probably talk about it after February 19th when the verdict on former President Yoon Suk-yeol is announced. Colin, let's move on to another topic. A new survey by the Culture Ministry shows that around 8 out of 10 foreigners have a positive image of South Korea. To what extent do you suppose is this reality a reflection of South Korea's soft power, if you will?
It's a very clear reflection, I would say, especially since the surveyed or the respondents to the survey who then talked to reporters about this did mention that, or even on the survey itself, they mentioned certain things that would influence their rating of Korea, including, of course, K-pop and dramas, which we would expect, but also Korean products. And if you think of all the Korean products out there in the world, from cosmetics to cars, it's not hard to see why those sorts of things, especially these days, would give a positive image of Korea. And, I think back to the sort of 1990s in the US when I was growing up, and I don't know if Korean cars were giving anybody a positive or negative image of Korea. It just was sort of, they were promoted as being cheaper than Japanese cars, essentially. And so nobody hated them, nobody loved them either. Nowadays, though, I think even if you just look at the automobile sector, that's changing. People might get a better impression of Korea from driving a Korean car. And what stuck out as interesting to me, especially, more so than any particular result in this survey, was the fact that South Koreans themselves were also polled, and they ranked lower than the global average on approval or on positive feelings, positive assessment of this country. And so you think, oh, well, why might that be? And this is often a story often told that it's a harder country for Koreans than necessarily for foreigners. But of course, many foreigners are tourists. Many of them don't live in Korea. Many will never come here. So they have a positive image, and there are many different factors that go into that. It's not sort of just orchestrated by the state, although the state has a hand in it, surely. But I think that it's worth noting that somehow people here in the country itself do see it very differently than people outside it. And you do see something we'll talk about a little bit more later, but foreigners who come here and live here for an extended period, they very often they come with stars in their eyes, and they leave thinking, this isn't quite the place I thought it was. So it's not necessarily that it speaks poorly to what South Korea is, but maybe the perceptions can diverge a little too far from the reality based on some of the ways that Korean things, Korean culture, Korea itself is promoted.
Right, and before we delve deeper into that, Kelly, with regard to this particular survey, the United Arab Emirates topped the list of countries with the most favorable image of South Korea. Do tell us more about this finding.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. It was not exactly what I expected. If you look at the survey, all of the respondents kind of ranked the reasons for why they had favorable opinions of Korea, and the top reason was cultural content, as Colin was just talking about. So things like, all the famous Netflix shows that have come out, K-pop, BTS, which is now making a comeback. The second thing was lifestyle and culture, if you will. I guess the way that Korea has kind of packaged and exported this image of how South Koreans live. And then the last thing was the reputation of Korean brands and products, which is continuing to elevate abroad. It's funny that I get this question. Up until a couple days ago, I was just showing bring a big family from the UAE, from Dubai, around Korea. And the reason why they were here is that they were getting medical treatment at a local hospital. The UAE has a bilateral agreement with South Korea, I think dating back to about 2011. And part of that agreement is if someone needs medical treatment that they don't feel they can get the right fit for in the UAE, the government, and if you're Emirati, I mean, let's be clear, you know, Dubai and the UAE is like 10% people who are actually citizens and the rest are immigrants. But if you're one of those, you know, that privileged class, you can actually come here and get your medical treatment and your trip largely paid for by the government. And so that was the situation that they were in. And they loved it here. And when I think about why, you know, a person from like Dubai or Abu Dhabi might feel very strongly in a positive direction towards Korea, I think there's a lot of overlap in values there. There's a sense of valuing cleanliness outside, orderliness, modernism, convenience. You know, I took them to the iPark Mall in Yongsan. They're like, wow, this looks like Dubai, right? Because it's surrounded by towers and kind of this nightscape view. So I think there's a lot of similarity there. When I talk to, say, some of my French friends or European friends, they kind of scoff at what they call this kind of cookie cutter, characterless, almost Soviet-looking way of life here, where they're like, ugh, I would never want to live in one of these Ramian apartments, right? Of course, that's a different cultural context that they're coming here with. And I think for someone from Abu Dhabi, that's exactly what they're looking for.
Right, a point well taken there. I see where you're coming from. Colin, also with surveys, a separate survey, I believe, of foreign residents and students here in South Korea showed that quite a number, most in fact, are quite optimistic about South Korea's democratic resilience. Do you share this outlook, Colin?
Yes and no, I guess we could say. A little of column A, little of column B. We should consider that many of these students, some of these reporters, come from countries that themselves are sort of less highly ranked or as developed democracies. Or we mentioned the Emirates just now, which no one considers a bastion of democratic values. And the US, where I'm from, I mean, plenty of Americans now think there's something faulty about American democracy as well. So they too might look at South Korea and say, oh, well, there's democracy in action. And with decent reason many times. Often they point to protests. For example, the protest that ejected Park Geun-hye eventually in 2016, and the protest against Yoon Suk-yeol more recently. And fair enough in the sort of strict sense of the term democracy, that these the people made their voice heard, and that voice was obeyed. It's a little less in alignment with the sort of modern definition of democracy, the modern sense of democracy, in that there is a mediating layer between the people and what actually happens. You know, when Park Geun-hye was in trouble, people were mad in the streets, and the National Assembly found a reason to appease that anger. Whether it had much to do with what people were angry about or not, that's a whole other question for another day. And as well, I think that the anger people have at Yoon Suk-yeol is a force to be reckoned with. And what it brings to mind a phrase from the 19th century, the late Joseon dynasty, or the Korean Empire period. There was a traveler named Isabella Bird Bishop, who was English, who came here and loved Korea when she spent some time here, sort of, well, mostly loved it. She had wrote a book called Korea and Her Neighbors, which I highly recommend, but she has a line in there about how gusts of popular feeling blow through Korean society. And I think that's important to keep in mind. There are many gusts of popular feeling here, distinct from public opinion as it might be known in certain other countries, and they're very strong, and they can have permanent effects. So I think rather than focusing only on the democratic process, as you might know it in certain other countries, watch what these gusts do. Watch what public sentiment, to use a more sort of high-level term. Public sentiment is, I think, the force often in control, which is, it's better than having a tyrant in a throne, certainly. But it's different than a republic as we've come to know it in the 20th century.
Right, something to think about. Kelly, as Colin mentioned earlier, there are quite a number of foreigners who say Korea, it's fun to visit, but it's quite tough to live in. What are your thoughts regarding this assessment?
Yeah, I've heard this a lot in my 9 years here. I think, you know, I'm a little biased because obviously I have personal connection here as someone who's half Korean and I can speak the language. But I do think there are certain things that are universal, no matter what your cultural background is. If you're not South Korean in nature or like a citizen. Even people who are Koreans who are citizens and live in the United States for, say, university can often feel othered in Korean society. So I think there's this sense that no matter how much one assimilates, they'll never truly belong. That's something that I hear again and again. But just more practically speaking, there are certain things that make it a little bit difficult to live and travel here. For instance, you know, if you don't have a, what are we calling them now? An ID card, if you will. You can't even order a pizza half the time or a taxi, right? Because everything is connected through your ID verification in your phone. You know, the AI translations on navigation apps here make it difficult to find things if you only speak English. There are certain things that I think could get better, but more fundamentally, you know, dual citizenship is nearly impossible to get here. Again, the kind of otherness that exists, even though South Korea is now only 90% Korean citizens and 10% foreigners, continues to persist. And so I think there's a sense that living here is great, visiting here is great, but there's maybe not a permanent, lifelong settlement that can happen here for a lot of foreigners, whether they're Korean by blood or not, or whether they speak the language or not. And this is something that I think might change over time, especially with the demographic needs of the country. But there might need to be, you know, kind of a greater government level embracing of foreigners for that to happen. I mean, Japan and Korea are actually notorious for being very difficult to have permanent residency or a long-term status here. The way that one of our, you know, long-term residency visas is set up here is you're almost a depreciating asset the more you age. So you could get a 10-year visa here, but if you don't continue to sustain a certain level of income or just simply by aging, you lose points, if you will, to maintain that visa. I'm sure Colin knows about this very well. So there are various factors here, but also I think if you look at, you know, K-pop Demon Hunters or, you know, some of these movies that come out, there's still a very one-dimensional view of what South Korean society is. The kinds of people that come here because they're K-pop fans, I think, need to acknowledge that this is a country with, you know, good things, bad things, its own societal issues as well. It's not a paradise. It's not a playground. It's a society that is just as complicated as any other country in the world.
Right, and speaking about travel to South Korea and the bad sides, if you will, Kelly. Colin, it was just 1 week ago, I believe, last Friday, President Lee Jae-myung issued a stern warning to hotels in Busan following reports of pricing schemes targeting BTS fans ahead of a concert in Busan this June. How do such despicable business practices and, of course, the president's efforts to deal with it affect tourism, do you think?
Yes, and BTS are back and making the impact you would expect, even though they have yet to put on a show of any kind, I believe, yet, but they've got a world tour scheduled. This is part of it, the show in Busan. And yes, our good friends supply and demand are rearing their ugly heads, I'm afraid. It's Busan. If you think about, you know, if you want to go to Busan right now, you'll get a better deal than if you want to go on opening day of Haeundae Beach and stay there. This is the same phenomenon. And we have reports of hotels increasing their prices 5-fold, 7-fold, 10-fold. And you think, well, that's pretty nasty, although it is BTS. I think BTS fans will be happy to hear this, but I think they're popular enough that it's not that much of a surprise. You can see why the demand would be so high to stay there. So the question is, what do you do in response? How to handle this? And one way is to issue condemnations on social media, as our president has done. You know, the state could make a law saying, okay, you can only charge 100,000 won per night to all the motels in Busan. You can do that. I guess those motels will be snapped up pretty quick. It'll be hard to find a room. So the result is not that everybody gets a motel room at a reasonable price, but a few people get, if they can get on it instantaneously, a reasonably priced room, and maybe the informal lodging sector can sort of do what it will with their prices. I think some Busanites, if that's the word, if they're enterprising enough, they may be able to rent out some spare rooms and sort of be set for the next 3 months with the money they need. But I really think the only realistic way to fix this supply and demand problem is to increase the supply of concerts. If really the management was serious about making it cheaper, they'd schedule more shows in Busan. I'm sure BTS could sell out a week there or more. And if you spread out that demand, you take the impact off the hotels at any one given night, you could bring the prices down, but the tour sounds like it's pretty much locked in, so maybe next time around they can consider that.
Right, and in the meantime, Kelly, briefly speaking, for the sake of comparison, of course, what can you tell us about the mechanism in place to fight overpricing elsewhere?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like this is the topic that's actually cropping up more and more. The UK, I think, starting in May, will have some kind of regulation in place against, for instance, ticket scalping and overcharging for concert tickets. Japan has enacted similar legislation where people can face pretty significant fine if they're caught charging way more for tickets than the original price. The United States is kind of an unfettered landscape for this. I mean, Beyonce tickets go for thousands of dollars a piece at this point, and so you have this kind of classist system that's built where certain artists like Taylor Swift is something that only people of a certain income bracket can now achieve. On a more serious note, with the Los Angeles fires, we did see some controversy about hotels or short-term housing rentals or even open apartments trying to jack up the price to take advantage of people who are displaced. And this is a state-to-state legislation issue, so there was a crackdown on some of these places that were trying to capitalize on an unfortunate event, not a BTS concert, but a real disaster. But it's something that I think is still, unfortunately, largely unregulated. In Japan, there was a case where the FTC warned a group of 15 hotels in Tokyo about data sharing. I guess they were accused of having meetings together where they were swapping information and projecting prices, and this could be seen as a potential violation of antitrust laws. That wasn't necessarily proven that there was price fixing happening. But I think what we're seeing is that there's a whole industry now on buying something up quickly and reselling it, but it can also backfire on business. I do want to mention, when I was a reporter here during the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics, there was a lot of coverage about hotels around the Olympic venues jacking up the prices to just ridiculous, unattainable values. And this actually scared people away from going to these events. And some of these hotels actually lost money because they couldn't book out their rooms. So I do think that we need to be careful about kind of this idea of greed and capitalizing on interest in a cultural event like a BTS concert.
Right, and speaking of Olympics, we have, of course, the one in Italy, Winter Olympics coming up next month. All right, on that note, I'm afraid we'll have to end today's show. Kelly, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Colin, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching.